Welcome to the Ordinary Extraordinary Cemetery, where every death had a life and every life had a story. My name is Jennie Johnson.
Hello, and I'm Dianne Hartshorn.
And this is one of those rare episodes this year where it's just Dianne and myself
Hmm.
tonight. Like we don't have a guest planned. We do have an episode planned, but we don't have a guest planned
Right.
tonight. So it'll just be the two of us that you guys have.
Where
Uh,
before it was rare to have a guest.
I
So it's
know. And this year we've had so many fabulous guests
I know
and
it's been incredible.
it's been wonderful. We've learned so much. I know you and I both have learned a ton from all our guests. But before we jump into tonight's episodes, we have a couple of announcements, two that Dianne is fully aware of, and a third one that I am not aware of. But if
Yeah.
you're watching us on YouTube right now, you can see that Dianne is like
And Twitter
excited.
paid it. I'm so excited.
Yeah,
'Cause-
so this is something she's making me wait to hear. So before we get to that, in case I decide to get ultra excited and then we get off track, let me do the first two announcements. So our first announcement is to our winners of our trivia contest that we had about 2 weeks ago now. We did
Mhm.
it the week before our Beyond the Grave event. And those winners, we had lots of people that played and answered the questions, but those winners won a beautiful copy of
Oh, it is so
Frankenstein,
pretty.
the book, that has been autographed by our Beyond the Grave cast. And you will also, along with that, be getting a really cool Mary Shelley bookmark and a photo of the cast all together so you can see what it was. I haven't shipped them out. I had said initially they would go out last week, the week of October 7th. However, I'm still waiting for the bookmarks that I ordered, the Mary Shelley bookmarks, to arrive. They haven't come yet. So as soon as I get those, I will be shipping them out. But in case Emily, Susan, or Elizabeth, if you're watching, here is what the books look like. They are these beautiful
Yeah,
copies. They've
they
got
are
a lovely
beautiful.
spine. I know. Yeah, these are just gorgeous. And they've all been autographed. The cast autographed the inside of them. So as soon as your bookmarks arrive, I ordered them from an Etsy artist. So as soon as those come, I will get all of these mailed out. And I just didn't want you to think that we had forgotten. I'm just waiting for the rest of your prize package to get here. So those will be coming
You'll
very
still get
soon.
it in time for Halloween.
Definitely, most definitely. And the second announcement, this is kind of a big one. And
This is
Dianne and
big. We've
I
talked
have
about
been
this,
talking,
what, 2 years?
yeah, we've been talking about this for a while. And then, of course, this year was the year that we decided to start putting our episodes
Hmm.
on YouTube. So now there's the visual along with the audio. And now we're going to jump in and try something new for the first time. On Halloween, we are going to actually go live and do a live episode where you guys will be able to join us through a link that we're going to provide to
Hmm.
you on YouTube. It'll be about an hour long. You guys will get to join us. We're going to do some talking. You guys have a
Just
chance
hanging
to just
out.
Q&A and hang out with us. It's going to be we've themed it because it's on Halloween itself.
Hmm.
So it's a witchy tea party. So bring your tea, bring your goodies that you want to snack on with yourself, and you can sit and chat with us. We'll do Q&A. We can talk about cemeteries. We'll have some giveaways. And that is also the night we are going to finally be able to launch our merch line that we've been working on. So we have a bunch of things put together, a store that's going up. So once all of that comes together, it will be ready in time for Halloween this year. So we would love, love, love to have you guys join us on Halloween. It will be 6 o'clock Mountain Time, which so then in the American time zones, that would be 8 o'clock Eastern,
Eastern.
7 o'clock Central, 6 o'clock Mountain, and 5 o'clock Pacific. If you are in any of the other time zones around the world, we'll ask you to do that math for us because
Yeah,
it's
it should
six
be a
to eight
clock.
hours depending on
Yeah.
where you're at. But we would love to have you join us. Of course, it will be recorded. So if you can't join us, you'll still be able to go back and watch the episode. But that will be, so there won't be a new episode released that morning
Mm-mm.
on the 31st. It will be that evening and it will be live. And we're going to see how this goes. We've never done it, but we wanted to try it. And we wanted a chance to meet some of you guys, listener. We've met a lot of our local listeners, but this gives us a chance to meet some of our listeners that are in other parts of the country or
Well,
around
and
the
then
world.
the cool thing is it's going to be the day after I have surgery, so God knows what is going to happen with this
You know,
episode.
when Dianne told me I was like, we could postpone this and do it like maybe closer to Thanksgiving. And she said, no, we're going to do it on Halloween like we had planned. And I said, okay. So
So
yes,
I
Dianne
mean,
might be a
I may be a
little.
lot of staring. God knows what I may be seeing, and
In
so
Colorado, we call that a Rocky Mountain High. And so
yeah.
we may be enjoying Dianne on her Rocky Mountain High while we're sipping whatever beverage. So
Yeah.
yes, it'll be, like I said, it's a tea party, but if you'd rather have something other than tea to drink, that is just fine. Tonight I'm drinking cider left over from our event, actually.
Oh, I still have some. Yeah,
Yeah.
because like I'm actually having hardware removed out of my ankle. And that's what one of the guys at work said. How did he say it? I'm getting a hardware update. So it's
Well,
only been in
they
there
have to
20
happen every so
years.
often.
Yeah. It's only been in there 20 years, so it's time to come home.
All right. Now, Dianne, for the drum roll, which I can't do a drum roll, but drum roll, Dianne. Yay! I know what that is.
These are so much nicer. These are the tins of our tea, and
Which
they are, you're going to ask me that. They're Halloween, but it's more apple and cinnamon. We didn't do like the pumpkin spice thing.
no, it's a very fall sort of themed tea. Actually, I'll look it up while you open it. So we will actually have a link to this tea available probably in the next day or two.
I need to
Um,
send you some tea then. I
yes,
need to send you some.
so that you can
Wow.
order it and hopefully have it in time for Halloween. So if you wanted to sip the Ordinary Extraordinary Cemetery podcast tea,
It has
our
cocoa
actual
nibs.
tea with us,
It has cocoa nibs in it. This is this
I cannot wait to smell it.
a smaller tin, what they consider their sample tins, and I am so already impressed with the size.
Well, the amount of tea that's packed into that little tin, I mean, they
Yes,
packed it in.
I am blown. And then of course I put the lid on and I spit it.
I'm trying to find the original link you sent me. And now, because we talk about so many 9,000 other things. Oh, here it is.
Oh, good.
So
I'm
this
glad
is our signature blend. We designed this. And it is Rubio's tea, black tea, apple pieces, cinnamon, apple flavor, and candy apple flavor, accented with cocoa nibs.
And we didn't do a whole lot of black tea. We just added a touch because my thought was we're going to do this in the evening and we do not need to stay up all night. But so I was real careful making it more as low caffeine as possible so you can drink
But
it with
I
us.
think it will be delicious. And these little sample tins that you can order when we get to them are $6. Is that right?
Yes.
Yeah. So very affordable. $6 for your little tin. And then, of course, it comes with our logo and everything on the cover, which is absolutely fabulous. And according to this, that one tin should make about 5 cups. So,
Yeah,
which is not bad.
I was pretty impressed with how much tea is in this little
Yeah.
guy. I need to send you tea.
So I will have the link to that in the show notes if you guys want to start ordering ahead of time. That will also be available in our merch store along with other merch that we aren't launching until Halloween itself. But because we'll share that and we will be giving away some of that merch that night on the episode. So make sure you join us live, because if you want a chance to win some of the free merch, you have to join us live that night
And
to get that chance.
This is limited. We didn't order like a truckload.
Right.
So just to let you know, don't wait to the last minute.
Yeah, because once it's out, it's out.
Well, we probably could order more. I just would be afraid of
in time for Halloween, though.
Right, have everybody have their stuff. But this could go all winter. This is what I like.
And we'll make sure we'll restock as we need to throughout the season. And then hopefully come spring, we'll come up with a new flavor for you guys. This will be our like fall, winter one. But in spring, we can develop something that's like spring, summer.
Seasons.
We'll have some seasonal teas.
Yeah, because Angela actually helped me sit down and do it and show me. So Angela of Heart and Horn helped me figure this out. So it was.
I'm so excited. I cannot wait to try it myself. This can be so good. I'm such a tea drinker too. Normally when we're doing these episodes, I am drinking tea, but like I said, tonight I had that cider in the fridge and I was like, oh, I'm going to drink the cider, and it's the spiced cider. So.
Oh, is it?
Yeah. Cause when I made the extra cider run, half of what I bought was spiced and half was not, but.
Oh, I didn't. Okay.
Yeah. The spiced cider, really good. And it's Safeway brand, in case anybody wants to know. Safeway's brand of spice cider, delicious.
Oh, I don't know which one we got, so I might have to crack into it. And
So, jumping into tonight's episode or today's episode, depending on when you're listening, we are trying to keep in our line of trying to be a little more spooky because it's October and we're getting close to Halloween.
Mhm.
And so tonight we decided we were going to discuss Victorian mourning customs specifically. They come up a lot in a lot of our episodes. We've actually brought up some here and there.
Mhm.
So we thought tonight we'd go into much more detail about why the Victorians did things the way they did when it came to death and mourning. And so we'll start with like a very brief overview. So, like the Victorian period, in case you didn't know, starts in about 1837 when Queen Victoria became the Queen of England. And it goes till 1901 when her son Edward ascended the throne after her death. And then we go into the Edwardian age.
Mhm.
Makes sense. So that's the Victorian age. So it's kind of a long span. And there's a lot of things that happened between 1837 and
Right.
1901 in their mourning customs. So they were bringing some of their older customs into their mourning traditions at that point. And then they developed new ones a lot of times because of Queen Victoria. She was very influential in a lot of what they ended up doing when it came
Well,
to death and how they acted.
yeah, I don't think we had our own American style, but we still
Not
don't.
until the Civil War.
Probably the Civil War,
Civil
but then
War
we
helped
had,
us develop more of our own style.
right, French fashion, English fashion, and definitely after Prince Albert died and she went into deep mourning for basically the rest of her life,
Mm-hmm.
then the Americans had to follow. Many Americans, probably more upper class Americans, followed the very strict lines of Victorian mourning
Yeah.
ritual and
And
rules, I
so
guess.
just to jump in, these particular customs and things we're talking about really applied to the UK and the US.
Hmm.
Some of them went to other places, but when I was doing some of this research, like Australia had some of their own trends, and there were a few other countries. For research purposes, it was easier to stick with
Right.
the UK and the US. So while there were some other customs in other parts of the world, that's what we're discussing today, are the ones that primarily pertain to those two countries. So
And
part of what was going on during the Victorian era was huge population growth in both the UK
yes.
and the US. So in the UK, their population doubled from 16 to 32 million people. That included some immigrants, especially from Ireland and Scotland and some of their surrounding countries. In the United States, within that time period, we jumped from 12.9 million people to 75.9 million people. And a large part of that was due to immigration from
Hmm.
Europe, especially, but also from some other countries. At the same time, birth rates became higher, but there were also higher mortality rates with those high birth rates. There was the expansion of railroads in both the UK and the US, which allowed for the expansion of the people because now we had the railroads connecting us in ways that it hadn't before. And there were agricultural advancements. So for
Hmm.
those rural communities, we had a lot of machinery and stuff that had been invented in that time frame that made farming way easier and made it easier to get the production of the farm
Right.
out into the cities and stuff. That's also the
More.
time of the
Yes.
Industrial Revolution, which completely transformed cities and how we lived in the urban areas, all our landscapes, our economies within those places. And the Victorians, as we know from any Victorian literature or any Victorian movie you've ever watched, loved the separation of their classes. So we had the upper class, the middle class, and definitely the lower working class.
Because also during this period is when they you mentioned it, the deportment books, which was the rules and regulation, not regulations, that's from work.
Etiquette.
The rules of etiquette and how to act properly. And the reason was because of the Industrial Revolution, because working class then oftentimes became a little bit higher class, and they needed to have a book to know how to behave properly in, higher class situations. So there was very strict rules, but everybody had this book. So you knew how to act, you knew how to what to wear, and
what to
which,
say, how to have a conversation. And they were books, but they are also like they're magazines, especially women's
yes.
magazines,
Hmm.
full of deportment and etiquette. One of my so one of my favorite books, of course, or book series, I guess, is the Anne of Green Gables series. And I
Hmm.
know there's I think it's in the first book. She's invited to tea at the manse, which is where the preacher lives, and she's so worried about following the exact rules, and she doesn't want to disappoint the preacher's wife and all of this stuff. And she says something, and I don't remember the name of the magazine, but she's like, I've read all the rules of deportment, so I should know exactly how to behave when I go to tea. But very common at the time, yes, to follow these rules of deportment. And like um, you said, Diane, as they moved up in money, so if they
Hmm.
managed to get from the lower class to the middle class to the upper class, there was definitely different ways to behave for each class and what was expected of them, and how they conversed.
And then, you people say about the Victorians that they were morbid, they were that. It was all so concentrated on death. But the reason being there was such a high mortality rate during the Victorian period where there there would be probably hardly any families who were not touched by death. And unfortunately, usually a lot of that was children, because the infant mortality rate was usually 1 in 5 children died before the age of 5, and 1 in 3, I can't even imagine that, died before the age of 15.
Mm-hmm.
And usually, and then not only just the loss of the babies, but for the mothers, so many mothers died either in childbirth or shortly after. And even where I'm working at the cemetery and we're doing transcription of the old books, it happens so often that it's really sad. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
because it wasn't the medical advances. There wasn't probably doctors who could, who were specialized in this. And yeah.
Well, and this was a period where we, especially in urban settings, maybe not as much in the rural settings, but in urban settings, we had stopped using for childbirth like midwives. For
Right.
centuries, we used a midwife who had experience delivering babies,
Hmm.
and they had these customs and things they did. And then when that became more related to witchcraft and all of that, we stopped using them. So we were relying on doctors. And a lot of the doctors, and we actually talked about this when we talked with Jared in our episode on Mary
Yeah.
Shelley. Mary Wollstonecraft, Mary Shelley's mother, died 11 days after Mary Shelley was born due to an infection that she most likely got from the doctor who delivered her baby because he didn't wash his hands. And
Yeah.
there was a very weird belief in this was of course before germ theory, so we were just starting to figure this out science wise. And even when a couple of doctors had started to figure this out, there were still a lot of other doctors that didn't necessarily believe in germ theory. They thought it was kind of out there. And the idea of washing your hands to cleanse in between patients or in between doing one thing or another just didn't ever sit right. And there was some weird, I remember hearing one time there was some weird connection with gentlemen don't wash their hands for something. And so these gentlemen doctors, and again, their medical schooling was a lot different than we have today,
Right. Exactly.
didn't have the idea that they could be passing these germs along. So, yeah, that maternal mortality rate was definitely 1 in every 200 births, was one of the facts I came across. I think it might have been slightly higher than that one, but for sure there were a lot of moms that
Hmm.
died giving birth or shortly after they gave birth for different reasons too. And the average life expectancy at birth at this time, so between these in this time period, was 40 to 45 years for those who survived to at least age 5. Beyond that, they said 55 to 60 years. So, which isn't bad, but still not a
No.
super long life. And it also depended on, again, your class. Um,
Hmm.
a lot, the upper class were more likely to survive a little longer because they didn't have to work as hard as those underclass as the lower
The
class, the
working
working
class,
class.
the
That's the word
working
I wanted.
class. Yeah.
Those who were in the working class were more likely to die at a younger age, more often due to injuries related to their
Right.
jobs than to, or health issues related to their
Right.
jobs. If
Exactly.
you were not out there working a hard job and you were in the life of luxury where you had servants to do everything for you, then you probably got to live a
Yeah,
little
you
longer.
probably lived a little bit longer. And the crude death rate was 22 to 25 per 1,000 people per year.
Yeah.
And the mortality rate of infectious diseases, which what we were talking about, because we didn't know what caused a lot of these diseases that were especially, I won't say epidemic. I guess that would be the right word, but
Or contagious, especially the
yeah,
contagious
contagious.
diseases. Mm-hmm.
Was 500 to 600 per 1,000 people and
100,000 people.
100,000 people. Sorry.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, so the mortality rate for infectious diseases was between 5 and 600 people per 100,000 people.
Yeah.
And of course, at this time period, we saw diseases such as tuberculosis, pneumonia, influenza, which, we still see deaths from that today, but also we had cholera, typhoid, scarlet fever, which definitely pertained a lot of times was caused by unsanitary conditions. And it wasn't just necessarily unsanitized conditions of filth. It was someplace I read where oftentimes the outhouse may had
Mm.
been, built upstream. I guess it would, where the stream or whatever, or the well, not the stream, but the well would be down from the outhouse. But they didn't put, those things together. And of course, we had childbed fever, which is what usually the mother died of after childbirth. Of course, accidents. We see a lot out here for us, railroad accidents, mining accidents, drowning and burns, and a lot of malnutrition and definitely poor sanitation and hygiene. And for Jennie and I, being in Colorado, we definitely see a lot of tuberculosis.
Mm-hmm.
Colorado Springs was a mecca for them. And actually, where did I read that? Colorado was like stage 1. So if you weren't that bad, you would come to Colorado. But
Right.
if you were a little worse, you would be down in, I think, New Mexico and then Arizona.
Arizona. Mm-hmm.
And I didn't really think of those two as being such high places for tuberculosis patients to go to. I just read that. So that was pretty interesting.
Yeah. And so yeah, all of those things, these were the killers that we saw most often. And so it was a part of people's life every single day. There was always the risk. And in this case, it didn't matter what class you belonged to.
Right.
There was always a risk that you could get one of the infectious diseases. The burning was another interesting one. It's part of the reason women's fashion changed for a while.
Mm-hmm.
During the 1860s, when hoop skirts were very much in fashion, they got bigger and bigger. There were several women who actually died because their dresses caught on fire. And depending on what their fabric was, some fabrics are more flammable than others. And they wouldn't necessarily burn to death, but they would be burned so badly they would die
Right.
within days of the burns, because those would happen all the time. Children would get too close to a fire, things
Mm-hmm.
like that. Unfortunately, the way to heat and cook in their house at the time was open flame in most cases, or a stove.
Kerosene lamps, yeah.
Yeah, so there was a lot of ways that people could die that
And I
way. And then
think
of
even,
course,
go
oh,
ahead.
go ahead.
I was gonna say, I believe, didn't Prince Albert die of typhoid or
It was typhoid
something?
fever.
It was
Mm-hmm.
typhoid. So something you think of as being
But
lower
they were living in a
class or,
palace.
yeah, exactly. So see, it didn't matter.
Yeah. And of course, the Industrial Revolution had a huge impact on
Mhm.
death rates at the time. Um, because again, we saw all these people that were moving from rural areas because farming was a struggle, or different community, depends on where you're coming from too.
Right.
Like different parts of the world were having famines due to their farming conditions, so that people were moving into cities, which was overcrowding the cities. And then people were working in factories, which we didn't have before. But then as we developed machinery and ways to make life more convenient, especially for the upper class, the lower class were the ones coming in and doing all that hard work. And they were living on top of each other, often in very squalid, nasty conditions. So all of that is the things that affected the death rates. And then because of all of this, this is when, and we touched on this in episodes 198 and 199 when we talked with Joy Jaguar about her new
Mm-hmm.
book, Pleasure Gardens of Death, how the death industry became a very commercialized industry at about
Right.
this time. As we developed cemeteries that weren't graveyards and churchyards, they became cemeteries. And then as cemeteries decided on rules and regulations for themselves, then we got to having more rules and regulations with how we were going to handle the dead. So that led to funerals becoming more formalized. That led to undertakers becoming professional, not just every once in a while, but for every death, the undertaker was starting to handle it. And then we went from having wakes and things inside the home to actually having funeral homes. All of this is related to how the Victorians began to handle death after the death of Prince Albert, especially.
Right.
But of course, again, depending on what class you fell into, there were different things that cost wise affected what type of funeral service you might have. So there were the pauper and undesirable funerals. So an undesirable would be somebody who was maybe not baptized, who had committed suicide, who was in a profession that was considered undesirable, like prostitution or something like that, murderers. Paupers, of course, who had no money, no way to fund anything, or oftentimes they may not have had family to help out. So those particular funerals were often covered by a fund within the city or community, sometimes by the church, but they weren't going to be a big elaborate thing. It was a burial service is really what it
Mm-hmm.
was. It was a preparation of the body. You put it in either a very plain wooden box or sometimes just some sort of a wrap, and it goes into the ground. Most of the time there wasn't a marker for them in the cemeteries if they were allowed on the cemetery grounds. A lot of cemeteries and formal cemeteries would have a pauper section, but they didn't put markers on them. Or in some cases, they were buried outside of the cemetery. There was a section because they
Right.
didn't want these undesirables in their consecrated ground.
And then the working class funerals cost between $5 and $20. And of course, poorer families often contributed weekly to their funeral funds because they didn't want to have to make the choice to have their family buried in a pauper's cemetery because they couldn't afford it. So they would, it would be part of whatever meager savings they had. They would put something away for their funeral fund. Um, and those funds usually would cover the cost of the coffin, the grave digger, the pastor or the priest. And then they were very simple, like Jennie was saying, a simple wooden coffin, or just a simple wrapped in a shroud. But then the upper class funerals were very elaborate, costing anywhere from $75 to $400, which back in that day, I mean, both of those amounts are huge. I can't imagine what a
Right.
$400 funeral was. And of course, it was like, you can't let your neighbors outdo you when it comes to the funeral elaborate celebration thing. So they would
Victorian
have,
wealth. You couldn't let your neighbors outdo you in anything,
yes,
including your death.
including in death. So they would have mourning coaches with the horses, with the ostrich plumes and velvet velvet covered carriages and horses. Of course, the elaborate caskets and the
And those
expensive
caskets
lining.
were often
Yeah,
carried in, oh, I actually have a picture for this. They were carried usually in glass or
right.
enclosed hearses that were drawn by those four or more horses.
Hmm.
And I have a picture. I'll put that up while you
Yeah, so
tell the
that way
more.
you can actually see it. But then it was like, and then it got to the point where it showed, and I don't know if this was the quote the funeral industry at the time, but the more you spent, the sadder you were because
Right.
it was it was an outward showing of your grief. So, of course, the businesses took advantage of it, just almost like they do today. Um, and with the industrialization, um, also led to the nuclear families where, at times families stay together for generations. And, as the parents and grandparents got older, then the kids and grandkids would take care of the family and it would stay. It was, I won't say the circle of life, but that's sort of the way it was. But unfortunately, then the Industrial Revolution allowed people to leave the farm, to leave the country, to move into the cities. And then, unfortunately, then the family lost their family support system. And that's where, and especially after the Civil War, where fraternal organizations really became very, very popular. And I know we did an episode sometime back on like
Did
the
a
Knights
couple
of
of episodes.
yeah, the Knights of
Mm-hmm.
Pythias, the Oddfellows, the Woodmen of the world. There was another one. Oh, well, any of those. And then their whole thing, and what I saw with the Woodmen, it was started after the Civil War, and it was just another way for the community and the members to care for the widows and orphans because women did not have like the opportunities and the benefits now if they lost a spouse.
Right.
So
It
they sort of
also
helped fill that
ensured
void. Yeah,
they also ensured a decent burial for those members
right.
that died. So that meant a burial service with a nice funeral, and oftentimes a marker would be included in that. And then if you're looking on YouTube right now, I put up a picture of a hearse being drawn by, this one is two horses. So this wasn't an ultra witch one apparently, but the horses are decked out in blankets and
Right.
their heads are covered. Everybody in that picture is wearing black. You can see the sort of from the side,
I wonder who
the
that
coffin
was.
inside the hearse.
Yeah.
And then you have this whole huge procession of people walking along behind it. So that's what a upper middle class to wealthy funeral would have looked like, procession would have looked like. They would have had the wake itself most likely at the house. Most of the time it took place, especially if you were middle class or higher, in your parlor, which when we talk about modern funeral homes or parlor homes, things like that, they still do the viewing in a parlor, in a funeral parlor. That's where that term
Hmm.
comes from, because we used to put the bodies in the parlor because that was the nicest room in the house. And of course, once
Right.
somebody died, when you have the visitors coming in to pay their respects, you would want them in the nicest room in the house. So they would put them there. And
And it was
another,
usually the first front room.
right,
So that way they didn't wander all
wander
over
through
the
your whole
house.
house and see the parts you didn't want them to see.
Yeah.
It's like my house. I do have what I call my parlor right off the front door. So when you come in my house, there is a parlor. Another thing that I thought was interesting, and I knew about these, but I didn't know a lot about it, but I know I'd read about it in certain Dickens and books and everything. And this was typically more of an upper class or maybe upper middle class tradition, but they would hire men that they called mutes, to essentially be professional
Mm.
mourners. So
Is that
this
the
is such
one?
a weird concept to me. A mute was basically a paid mourner whose job was to keep vigil outside of the house.
Is that is that
Yep,
it?
and there's some mutes for
Okay.
you. And then lead the funeral procession. A mute was dressed in somber clothes with a black top hat. If it was an adult's funeral, he'd wear a black sash and carry a black crepe covered staff, which is what you're seeing in this picture that Dianne is showing. There's two of them in this picture, actually. And for a child's funeral, the sash and staff would be white. Most mutes were day laborers who took on funeral work for a bit of extra money, and it was irregular work, so they made the most of it. Not the least in the amount they drink. It was traditional to give mutes gin to keep them warm, especially if these were winter funerals, while they stood outside. So they were often drunk by the time they were done with this particular job because they would get lots of gin on this.
And I bet
So
you they didn't get paid. They got it ginned.
yes. So these guys, and I don't see it in the other picture but I don't see one in this picture, so I don't know if there was one. But for a while, these were the men that you would see at the front of the funeral procession. Right before you would see the hearse and stuff, you would see the mutes. And they'd also be, like they said, outside your door, or maybe at the church, outside the church, wherever they needed you to be the mourner. And it was kind of a way of also advertising that somebody had just passed away
Mm-hmm.
in the family, because you would see these men standing guard, technically,
Uh-huh.
and know that the family was in mourning at that point.
That is interesting. I know a lot of times they would put wreaths and stuff on the door, or the draping of the block,
Mm-hmm.
just so you would know. And so that's interesting. That I like the mutes because
Yeah.
that
And they were
way,
called mutes because they didn't talk. So they were
yeah.
just in mourning. They had to keep their faces very somber. There was no smiling or laughing or telling of jokes or anything, but they were posted there for that. So
Oh, it's
this
almost like working in a funeral home and you have a visitation and the funeral director or whoever's assisting the funeral director just pretty much is there for the family.
true.
Usually you don't say anything. You're
You're
just
just
there.
standing there and keeping an eye on everything. Yeah.
Hmm. That's interesting. That is
So
interesting.
I was going to say, and the other thing that, and we mentioned it just a little bit ago, but the other thing that really changed the relationship for Victorians with death in America, not so much in the UK because it didn't affect them the same way, but here in America, was the Civil War, because we lost
Right.
so many men and women and children during that time period, not only due to the war itself, obviously, because we were fighting each other, but also because of the diseases and stuff. So there was a lot of death, and it really did change the way we mourned in America, and why we became, I think, more willing to take on some of Queen Victoria's uh, habits that she developed in the UK only about 20 years prior to our Civil War.
Yeah, because Prince Albert died in 1861. So, and then as we know, if we're at all familiar with Queen Victoria, she pretty much wore black mourning the rest of her life. And of course, then we followed that. And for women, especially, we had a very, very strict rules as far as mourning. And let's see. And as Queen Victoria said, my life as a happy one is ended. The world is gone for me. If I must live on, and I will do nothing to make me worse than I am, it is henceforth for our poor fatherless children, for my unhappy country, which has lost all in losing him, and in doing what I know and feel he would wish. I can almost see that in Queen Elizabeth when Prince Philip died.
Probably. Well, and Queen Victoria and Prince Albert were so in love with each other. That's one of the
Yes.
things that I think this is where we start to develop the idea. We're going to go away from death for a minute and we'll go towards marriage. But, at the time, and even during the Victorian era, arranged marriages were very common, especially among the wealthy and the royalty, because
Yes.
obviously we were trying to keep royal bloodlines. And Prince
Hmm.
Albert was royal, but he and Queen Victoria really did fall in love. And theirs was
Yeah.
a love story. And they were married for 21 years. They got married on February 10th, 1840. And they would go on to have 9 children together, and they were considered a golden couple. So like Kate and William now. Um,
Exactly. Well, I think
yeah.
even Elizabeth and Philip, you
Mm-hmm.
know, because
So
yeah, he was very supportive. I don't know. He was so, to me, and I could be wrong, he was so supportive of Queen Elizabeth as Philip was to Victoria.
right. And so when he died, she was just
Hmm.
devastated. Like she never, like Dianne said, she never did get over it. She wore black for the rest of her life after that. And it was a lot of her other customs that she came up with in her grief that really began to latch on to the rest of the population worldwide. Like it wasn't just her in the palace, but as people learned what she was doing in her mourning, more
Right.
and more people developed those same customs within their own mourning things. And of course, one of those was the mourning attire, especially for women. We're going to learn a little bit more here about what we were wearing as women during mourning in the Victorian era.
Of course, they were saying there was no hard and fast rules. And I think a lot of the real strict stuff, of course, followed suit for more of the upper class women because they had the luxury of not having to go out and work in the factories, earn a living. They could just basically stay home and mourn. And so, usually for a woman in mourning, she was in mourning for an entire year, which meant
Or
she
2 years,
wore,
depending on which rules you're following.
right, and then she was in black the entire year. And I think it was the first 6 months. And then after that, she maybe could add white. And even, so that the first period was called the deep mourning. And that was heavy wool bombazine, if I said that right, which is a combination of wool and silk,
Mhm.
alpaca fiber, delaine, which is like a fine combing wool, merino, which is a thinner, softer wool, crepe silk, which you know how fragile that is, collars, cuffs, bonnets, veils, and you couldn't not wear any jewelry. I think they could wear their wedding bands, but
Yeah,
and
that
then
was
as
it.
the mourning period progressed, then you could add black jewelry, and it had to be jet or bog jewelry from Ireland that was made from peat.
Or
And
glass. That black glass became popular
yeah,
too.
black glass. And then let's see.
The only thing, if you go back to the deep mourning,
Yeah,
widows could wear a white widow's cap, which was earlier in the Victorian era. That the white widow's caps kind of fell out of fashion later in the Victorian era as we get closer to the Edwardian era. But if you look
mm.
at some of the old pictures of even Queen Victoria, she's in that full mourning and all her black, but she a lot of times she will have the white widow's cap on her head. And actually, I have some pictures of Queen Victoria. I'll change
And
that.
then so we talked
The,
about the first morning was
so deep mourning and followed by the first mourning, which is the deep, still your deep black colors, but now you could add trimmings.
right. And
So,
then but you even there was mourning periods for brothers, uncles, of course, children. I
mhm.
mean, it was like they looked, I swear to God, they looked for an excuse to mourn.
Well, I went and did some digging to find out what the length of mourning was for each one.
Mm-hmm.
So, for a widow, so a widow is a woman who was
Mm-hmm.
married. There were two different ones depending on kind of where you lived and which one you wanted to follow. It was either 1 year and 1 day or up to 2 years. For a husband, though, it's only 3 months.
Well,
So if
yeah,
you're
because he needed somebody to
to
marry to
take care
take
of
care of
everybody else.
kids. Mm-hmm.
1 year of mourning for deceased parents, 1 year of mourning for children, 6 months for deceased grandparents, 6 months for deceased friends. Uh, and that's only if the mourner was to receive an inheritance from that friend. So otherwise, it was less time. You didn't have to be the full 6 months. 6 months for deceased siblings and 3 months for deceased aunts and uncles.
But what is also interesting, and psychologists have looked at this, that, and of course, I don't think the Victorians realized that, but usually that 1 year or the 1 to 2 years is the time that they say is that first year. You know, the hardest after a death, the hardest time is the
Mm-hmm.
first holidays, the first birthdays, the first anniversaries. And it's that period of time, usually it's a year at the very least, for people to go through. So the Victorians probably had the right idea about mourning. They just didn't realize they had the right idea.
Right. So now if we go back, so from the deep mourning, then you go into your first mourning, which is after the first 6 months or so, depending on which period of mourning you're going through and who you're mourning. And this is where you're for women, your dresses could become a little fancier. Still everything in black. You
Mm-hmm.
weren't going to add any colors, but now you could add extra trimmings like bows and ruches and frills, things like that, things that you wouldn't have worn in the first part of it because you were
Right.
very
In
plain and
mourning.
simple, covering your face, the whole thing. And then we go into the third mourning or the half mourning, depending on which one you're looking at. And this is so if you are following the 2 year rule as a widow, this would be at about 18 months. If you're following the 1 year, this would be closer to 9 months, is what I read.
Mm-hmm.
But this is where you can start wearing a little more color, but still very specifically. It was light gray,
Mm-hmm.
white,
Dark color still.
black, but you could also, or violet, that was another color they would let you wear. But now you could add gold jewelry to your black jewelry. And you could actually start going out in public again. So, and actually, we'll talk about that a little more later. And then
And go ahead.
I was going to say, and then for the men,
Had to wear an armband.
or a hat band
Yeah.
and black gloves. That was it. They didn't have to change anything else about their attire, and they didn't have the long mourning periods that the women had, and they didn't have to change their whole wardrobe.
Well, of course, this again is for upper class. I mean,
And
the
middle class,
farmers
yeah.
or the
The upper
Irish
class and the middle class.
yeah, and the Irish immigrants, the wives did not stay home for a year in mourning. You know, they had to get out there and work or do something because their only means of support is gone.
And they may or may not have been wearing black on a regular basis. They a lot of times, if they were working class, they probably did have a black outfit, but they
Right.
probably only had 2, maybe 3 outfits if they were lucky. And one of
Exactly.
those would have been black, and that probably would have been their best dress. So they probably would have worn it for the funeral and that kind of thing. And then it was back on with their work clothes because that's what they needed to wear to work to keep their houses or their apartments or wherever they lived. They weren't going to be sitting at home like the upper class and the middle class women. But yeah, and so the men had it much easier on that.
And this is a picture.
There
Actually,
she
it's a
is.
picture of my great grandmother
Oh,
in her mourning. I don't know why she got a picture in mourning. I have no idea. But this is after the death of her husband. This is like from 1890s. She's only 20 years old, but you can see the large veil of the hat that and of course the veil is pulled back
she is in
over.
full mourning at this part, so
Yeah,
she's still
full
in the early
mourning.
stages. Well, and the mourning, and we'll talk about it a little bit more here in a minute, but the mourning photographs were actually quite common because it was just another way of showing how you loved whoever died if you got your picture taken in mourning. And then, of course, the other thing that Queen Victoria popularized with not just the full black garb that she had said she was wearing, but was also the popularization of actual mourning jewelry. So mourning jewelry had actually been around for a while. It goes back further than the Victorians, but the Victorians took it to a whole new level when they decided to do this, as they did so often. So mourning jewelry was things like brooches or rings, hair clips, things that you would put in your hair, anything like that, necklaces. Oftentimes they included the deceased's hair inside of them. We also loved to make the hair wreaths as another sign of mourning from loved ones, where we'd collect their hair and we'd make fancy wreaths and hang them on our wall. But the jewelry, if you were upper class, you would get jet if you could afford it. It was very expensive, though. It was a hard material, and it required very skilled craftsmen to make the jewelry out of it because it's not an easy stone to carve. And I guess
And
isn't
it just from one place? Isn't it like Whitby, England, Whitby jet? That it became so popular, and it was just where they mined it. It became so popular that it basically they mined. If that's the right word. They mined all the jet out of the side of the mountain.
Pretty much.
So you can't get Whitby jet anymore.
Not unless you get an
antique piece. Yeah.
So black glass, or the bog jewelry that you're talking about, became more common because glass was way easier to manufacture and they could sell it for a lot less too. Other things that were used, though, was onyx, which we've seen, vulcanite, gutta percha, and of course the bog oak, which we mentioned. So those were all, especially between 1860 and 1900, those were the things that most of this mourning jewelry was being made out of. And then, of course, the other part of that was lockets with photos. So photography was invented in 1822. And it didn't take long for photography to catch on and for them to develop new ways of creating photos of different sizes and types. And so it very quickly became popular for jewelry, including lockets, bracelets, rings, everything.
Well, when we did a mourning display, we have several pieces of hair jewelry, whether it's in a pendant or the wreath. And at first, people got totally freaked out when they saw it. and it's like, okay, just think about this for a minute. We cut our children's, we keep, ringlets of their hair.
When they're babies.
And I'm like, and just, I go, well, what if, just picture, because the timing of the Civil War and that, what if your loved one, your fiance, your brother, son, father was going off to war and you snipped or they gave you a clip of hair. And then would you not put that someplace to carry it with you forever?
Hmm.
And when you put it that way, then their whole idea, at first they were, I don't want to say grossed out about it, but
Some
they,
people are kind of grossed out by it,
okay,
though.
they were grossed out about it. But then after you put it that way, they're like, oh, yeah, that makes sense. So it wasn't so morbid after that.
Right. And the other thing is hair is a universal symbol of life. Like there's lots of cultures that use hair for different things.
Hmm.
And so it really was associated with the preservation of love. And like you said, especially during the Civil War, it became popular to have some locks of hair with you. The men would take their, wives or girlfriends' hair with
Exactly.
them and vice versa.
Hmm.
So they would have it anyway. And you would get locks of hair from like even like your best girlfriend or something is going to get married and move it away and you would keep a lock of her hair because you might not ever see her again, that type of thing.
Yeah,
So
so it was nothing really all
they were
morbid. I
collecting hair
mean,
all the time.
yeah, exactly. And
So with all of this, the social expectations were
yes.
very rigid. As we said, there were all these etiquette rules that it wasn't a hard and fast rule. There was nothing that said you had to do it this way, but especially if you were upper class or middle class,
Hmm.
it was really frowned on when you didn't follow these expectations. So, for those first two stages of mourning that we mentioned, there was absolutely no socializing outside of your home. If you could afford to stay home and you had servants and you were doing all of that, you stayed home. You didn't go to church, you didn't go to weddings, you didn't go to parties or balls or anything. You were at home in mourning. You could receive callers if they were coming to call about the deceased or business or whatever. You could do that at home, but you couldn't go out and do anything. And it wasn't until you reached that half mourning stage that you were allowed to re-enter society. So when you could put colors on, then you could go back out in society again.
Yeah, so that scene in Gone with the Wind with Scarlett in her mourning
Mm-hmm.
dress, that would not have happened. I mean, Scarlett was Scarlett, but that probably still would not have happened.
I mean, we have read of cases where women did go outside of that or they were like, whatever. But, and
Yeah.
I have a hunch, even in some upper class things, if it was an arranged marriage and then maybe they didn't love their spouse so much, maybe they weren't as particular about sticking to the rules for as long. Like maybe when they got a little closer to certain stages, they
Yeah,
nudged
and
them.
then they still had to be very careful for reputation
Right.
because a man could pretty much do whatever he wanted, but the women would suffer if people decided to, you know, say disparaging things about them.
Exactly. Because of all of this, we now had, or then because of not being able to socialize, which think about it, most
Mhm.
women want to socialize
Yeah,
with each other. So we developed,
what was known as mourning cards.
yep.
And in our deportment, so our department is the name of the book, published in 1890, John Young observes, to the unrefined or underbred, the visiting card is but a trifling and insignificant bit of social paper. But to the cultured disciple of social law, it conveys a subtle and unmistakable intelligence. Its texture, style of engraving, and even the hour of leaving it to combine to place the stranger, whose name it bears, in a pleasant or a disagreeable attitude, even before his manners, conversation, and face have been able to explain his social position. My goodness. I hope they had somebody to explain that to everyone else.
Well, and what's even funnier, and I didn't put all of it in here, although there's a little bit that gets mentioned in this next section, but there was ways of folding down certain corners or folding it in half or doing different things that meant different things, just like the waving of the fan, how
Right.
women use their fan. Same thing
Mhm.
with the calling cards. How people remembered what meant what is beyond me because it's kind of crazy that they had all these rules. But if a certain corner was folded down, it meant one thing. If it was folded in half, it meant
Oh,
something else. So it could convey
messages.
something good or something
Yep.
not so good, depending on how you folded your calling card, or in this case, your mourning card.
Hmm. So, and then also we have memorial cards, which they announced the sad event with the aid of a complete iconography of death. So these are usually very beautiful, ornate paper cut out on in cards, and they're gorgeous.
Yeah,
They
they
have
are beautiful when you
in,
can find them.
yeah, including urns. They have weeping willows and even weepier women.
I liked that description.
John Young writes, on the announcement of death, it is correct to call in person at the door to make inquiries and leave your card with the lower left-hand corner, as Jennie was talking about, turned down. Cards can be sent to express sympathy, but notes of condolences are permissible only from intimate friends. So that's interesting.
So, right. So you could say, I'm sorry for your loss, but if you weren't intimate with them, you didn't go beyond the I'm sorry for your loss. You just left it at that. If they were intimate friends and you knew them well, then you could go on about how much you missed them and what they meant to you and all the poetical things that the Victorians like to do. But otherwise, you kept that to yourself. Just weird things. And then we also, of course, we mentioned photography was becoming very popular. It started in 1822, quickly developed all kinds of ways of how the film was developed, what was used. And of course, as it became more popular, more and more people wanted photographs of the living, but also of the deceased. And so this is the era when we get post-mortem photography. It really became popular starting in the 1840s, and it took off from there up until probably around World War I. We start to see a little less of it.
Yeah.
So it typically involved posing the deceased in lifelike positions sometimes, or in the case of Dianne just changed her photo, you see an entire family, a mother, father, and baby. They're all in one coffin together, which is very sad and tragic because, you know, something horrible died there.
Right.
But they were posed, or there were different types of positions so that they did this in. So there was the posed or resting photographs where the deceased appeared relaxed, sometimes in a chair or on a couch, or they are inside their coffins. And here's another one with the family and two of their infant babies who had died. I'm assuming those were twins who passed away. There's the cradling photographs, which have living family members, sometimes holding the deceased, or again, like in the picture that Diane's showing now, where they're inside. The babies are in the coffin, but the whole living family is around them. And there were the active photographs, which the deceased appears engaged in daily activities such as reading or maybe playing an instrument, playing cards, different things like that.
Yeah, those are sort of weird.
Yeah. They often also included personal items, clothing or jewelry. And actually, if I change it back to the Queen
good. I'm glad you
Victoria
put the
picture.
closes up the
The
picture
clothes.
with the dresses.
So if you look at the picture behind me now, Queen Victoria is actually holding a painting of Prince Albert, and that's one of her daughters in the picture behind her. And then the picture next to her, that is actually all of her daughters, and that is a bust of Prince Albert on the in the center there on that column.
Yeah.
So
I think every picture after that, she had something like that.
Yeah. She tried to represent him a lot, but yeah, in these pictures, these is all including. So again, personalizing it to whoever was deceased in this case. And because she was the queen, she obviously had lots of things that she could include of the princes.
And then, because a lot of people, again, find that morbid, but it's like a lot of times, not everybody had a camera, let alone a cell phone in their pocket. That sometimes, especially with children, that may be the only picture they would have.
Yeah. And, you know, to get your picture taken, if you didn't, if the photographer didn't have the equipment to come to you, you had to go to a photography studio in most cases, and that was expensive. If you were lower middle class or working class, you probably couldn't afford to do that. So sometimes the only photographs that some families have are these postmortem photographs, because it was the only time they would have the money to do it. Especially, there's a lot of times if the family did have, if they belonged to a fraternal organization or whatever, and so they were getting some money from that, that would actually let them pay for these postmortem photos of their deceased loved ones. And yeah, they couldn't afford to just have photos. It's not like today where we can take a bajillion photos on our phones and then decide that we don't need to keep all 9,000 of them and keep our favorites. Then you got, it
Exactly.
was like maybe one or two shots and that was it. So
Hmm.
to be able to have, so like that family behind Dianne with the babies, maybe I don't know who this family is. That could be the only family pic photo they have from that time period
Of the
with
babe of the
themselves and
kids.
their living
Yeah.
children, as well as the two deceased babies.
Yeah, that's so sad.
Yeah.
And
But it
then
became a very popular tradition.
so we go from mourning and photography into the rise of spiritualism. And Jenny laughs because depending on how you believe, of course, there was people who took it to the next level with spiritualism and seances and connecting with the dead. And of course, people took advantage of people in
Oh,
mourning.
yeah. There were lots of
And
those.
yeah, so we have, and this is what is very interesting. I know Houdini's mother was it his mother,
I
right?
think so. Hmm.
And then we have, author Conan Doyle, who wrote the Sherlock Holmes series, was out debunking it. And I think Houdini, was it Houdini too?
Houdini
Was
wanted to debunk it. He had a very big interest in it,
right,
and he was trying to debunk the frauds. But I think he also believed in it too. I think he believed there were real
right.
mediums and there were really people who could speak to the dead. But I think he also knew there were a lot of people who were taking advantage of those in mourning. And so, but and then you had people like Mary Todd Lincoln who
Yes.
used seances all the time because, especially after Lincoln was assassinated, but even before that, she was having mediums come in because of their
Hmm.
son who had died. And so she was forever holding seances at the White House and later because she was so grieving. She was grieving so much over the loss of her child and then her husband that she needed to try and have that connection. So you just know there are several mediums that took advantage of poor Mary Todd at that point to
Well,
be
and
like,
then
oh,
people just they believed in that stuff more because
right,
we were more connected to this, I won't say the spirit world, because it death was such an everyday part of life during that time that now, you either believe in it or you don't. It's I don't think it's as common as it was then.
well, and this is the time too when we start to see more ideals changing behind Christianity. So there's a
Mm-hmm.
lot more people. We talked about this again with Mary Shelley, with Percy Shelley. There's a lot more atheists at this point who are saying they're atheist or they're looking for something beyond what they've learned through whatever Christian denomination they
Right.
belong to. And so going outside of this more spiritual realm as opposed to the religious realm of
Yes.
believing made it easier for a lot of people to buy into this spiritualism movement because they wanted something that wasn't the strict Christian doctrine that they had grown up with. And I say Christian doctrine because there's so many different
Right,
Christian
exactly.
religions that depending on where you grew up or how you were raised, it was different for everybody. But they wanted to go beyond that. They wanted to know that there was more out there than
Yes.
just death itself.
The death was not, for spiritualism, death was not the end. It
Right.
just was a different plane. And then that way there was still a way that the living loved ones could possibly still communicate. And in, Christianity, that just didn't happen.
Right.
So
You would die and you would go to heaven or hell and that was it.
that
Like
was it.
your person no longer your soul was no longer anywhere near the earthly plane and
Right.
could no longer develop. And of course then there was conflicts between the churches and the spiritualists and lots of stuff that led to that, which we'll save for other episodes, but this is when it really became prevalent and it stayed prevalent really up until after World War 1
It seems
through
like
World
World
War
War
1.
One, like that
I
it all
think
the idealistic stuff ended.
Yeah, I think it really, by the time we hit the Great Depression, or at least here
Hmm.
in America, by the time the Great Depression came, a lot of that fizzled, not completely, but it hadn't, even through the 20s, I think it was still pretty popular
Oh yeah.
because,
Yeah.
they were having seances at their parties and all of that. But I think once we hit the Great Depression and we were so
Hmm.
focused on the economic side of things at that point and society was moving a different direction, the spiritualism kind of died out. It's never completely died out. There's still plenty of people. There
Right.
are plenty of people who do it, but this is when it really became everywhere. And you read it, if you read any literature or you watch any period movies, there's always something about a seance happening
Hmm.
in these movies. And of course, all our creepy, scary movies that are set in Victorian era, there's always at least one seance happening.
Right.
Um, but of course, our Victorians, even as practical as they were about some things, were still extremely superstitious
Hmm.
about other things, which kind of cracks me up. But again, we were on that verge of science versus everything else. And I
True.
say that science versus religion, science versus old world beliefs.
Hmm.
And of course, in both the UK and America, where we had a lot of immigrants coming from other parts of the world, they were bringing those traditions with them as well.
Right.
So burial traditions, spiritual traditions, religious traditions, and of course, any um, connection to death that they had, any weird superstitions. So I picked out some of these I know we've mentioned in past episodes, but some of these I hadn't heard before. So I picked some out. So, of course, the first one is covering all the mirrors with a black cloth when somebody died. This was to prevent the soul of this deceased person from becoming trapped inside the mirror.
And another one was stopping the clock in a death room, or you will have bad luck.
Although I really think that was more so they knew what time to put on the death certificate.
Yeah, 'cause I can't imagine. Oh, wait, stop the clock. We have, somebody just died, but make sure you stop the clock. And it's not like as easy as tapping
Right,
today
because you
to
would
stop
have
the
to go
clock.
over, if it had a pendulum, you could stop the
Yep.
pendulum and that would keep it from stopping. But yeah, or keep it from going, I
Yeah.
meant.
Going. Yeah.
Yeah. If several deaths occur in the same family, tie a black ribbon to everything left alive that enters the house, including your dogs and chickens. This will protect against death spreading further. Or the other one was two deaths in the family means that a third is sure to follow, which we still hear that one a lot. That one
Yeah.
comes
It's
up with
always
like celebrity deaths.
it always goes in thirds.
Uh-huh. We're always like, and I do that. I will still to this day when celebrities die, I'm like, that's one, that's two, there's the
Yeah.
third one. Within a
And
week, there's
unfortunately,
always
it's
three.
always
Always.
close. I mean, it's not like and really close together.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Another thing is to meet a funeral procession head on. And if see, I didn't know this one. If you run into one or you see one approaching, turn around or turn probably off.
Don't face
Um,
it directly. Yeah.
yeah. If this is unavoidable, hold onto a button. I'm assuming like a button on your clothes
I'm assuming so.
until the funeral passes.
Yeah.
And
So it's
then,
supposed
okay,
to be
yeah.
unlucky if you come upon a funeral procession that you are not actively a part of.
Okay, I'm gonna know how I gonna do things different driving out of the cemetery when the funerals. I usually park and wait till them go by, but that's
I've
interesting.
always done that. If there's one passing on the road, I pull over and I let them all go first. But
Hmm.
the other one pertaining to the funeral procession is if rain falls on the funeral procession, the deceased will go to heaven. So I don't know what that means. If it doesn't rain, I guess you're not going to heaven. Or if you hear a clap of thunder following a burial, it indicates that the soul has departed and reached heaven. So either one of those kind of made me giggle.
Well, and then if it rains in an open grave, then someone in the family will die within the year. Well, I guess if it's raining outside, I don't know what to say about that one.
With which with Victorian death rates, that's very possible that probably did happen within a year.
Yeah, exactly.
Probably did lose someone. Not to make light of that, but it probably did happen that way. And then, of course, the final one, which we still say to this day, or at least I
Right.
think most people do, is never speak ill of the dead because they will come back to haunt you or you will suffer misfortune.
You just don't speak ill of the dead. Period.
Right. I mean, nope, I'll take that back. I mean, there's a few people throughout history where there's really nothing nice you can say about them, but we just don't really talk much about them then.
Oh yeah, I wasn't talking about like people of history, just people that we may know within close proximity, not.
Right.
Oh yeah, there are several historical figures that, yeah, you cannot but say bad about them.
I
But
know it's really hard to say anything nice about some historical
anyway,
figures. I don't I don't think I've known anybody personally in my life that has passed away that I couldn't find something nice to say about. or that I could just be like, we just won't talk about that person. We just leave it to the thing.
Right.
There was also the other one where if you are speaking of somebody who has passed away, you would say like their name and then be like, God rest their soul. That was a very common thing to do for a long
Yeah.
time because before you talked about them, you were mentioning that you're like sending up this little prayer to them
Right.
to be like,
I
I'm not
like
going to talk
that.
bad about you and I'm hoping you're resting in peace, but don't come back and haunt me.
Yeah,
So
that's sort of like, God rest your soul. Yeah, don't come back.
yeah, stay where you
My
are.
address has changed.
So there's a whole lot more to Victorian burial customs and
So much
traditions
more.
and mourning traditions. We didn't even really get into the burial side of things because we have talked about that in some of our other episodes, but we just thought it would be kind of fun, a little spookier than what we normally do to talk about some of these traditions, but also because we end up mentioning a lot of these things in other episodes because so
Mhm.
many of the cemeteries we talk about were developed during the
I
Victorian
was gonna
era.
say, especially for us in the United States and around here, we have Victorian era cemeteries.
Yes. So it's good to understand sort of why the cemeteries are the way they are, which again,
Hmm.
when we had Joy on a few episodes back, that was super helpful because she went into we in
Oh, it
the
was
two episodes we
amazing.
did with her from what they started as to where they ended up as to where we are at in the modern day. But there's still a lot of these customs that even in modern society we still tend to follow to a degree, not as strongly. Like most of the time, I think most funerals I've attended, most people still wear black at least to the funeral. They may not wear it for the year or 2 years following, but
Well,
they're still wearing
yeah.
black or a somber color to most funerals, although that has changed in more recent years. There has been requests, especially if it's a young person, where they ask them to wear colors, but we still tend to do that. We still have actual funeral processions.
Hmm.
Granted, they're not horse drawn anymore, they're motorized vehicles coming
Right.
along, but we still have the procession and you still have the from wherever the funeral itself takes place to the cemetery, people
Hmm.
are all following along. You have the long line of cars and motorcycles and everything coming through and all of that. So there's still a lot of things that we took from the Victorian era that we've never truly done away with, even
When
in
you
our
think
modern
of
life.
the hearse as the carriage.
Yep. Yeah. And the hearse, well, they didn't use the hearses if you were super poor. You probably just had a wagon
Well,
that you
yeah,
could
but I mean,
haul it.
it's
But
like the same thing as the carriage, and you follow behind big black
mhm.
carriage, and so you had a big black hearse.
So, we don't have mutes anymore. We don't necessarily cover all our mirrors. I don't know. Maybe some people still cover their mirrors, but um, there's still a lot of traditions that I think we still follow to this day that are remnants of what the Victorians decided was proper mourning etiquette for
Well,
themselves.
we have become so distanced from death, where at one time when a family member died, it was usually the women of the family who dressed the body and washed the body. And I remember when I was working at the cemetery, there was at the funeral home, I think it was of the Baha'i faith, that the daughters came in and dressed their mother and washed their mother in the funeral home. They allowed them to do that, which I
I
thought
do
was
think
pretty
there's a lot of
cool.
funeral homes that will still
Hmm.
allow families to do it if the family really, if it's religious wise or if the family just really needs that. And I think that we said this when we talked with Joy, I think it did help with the grief process because they got that chance to do that final goodbye with
Hmm.
their loved one as opposed to handing. Now some people may not want to do that, and if they can hand it off to somebody else, that might be easier for them in the process of mourning. Everybody mourns differently. The one really cool thing about the Victorians and their mourning customs was they never set a length to the end of mourning. Yes, they had a length of time for like when you were supposed to wear what and when
Outward
you were supposed to be out in
stuff.
society and
Yeah.
stuff. But part of it was a lot of women, especially, not so much the men, because we already talked about their fashion, but the women typically continued to wear black even after their particular time periods were up. And maybe not full on black, but they would still wear some black. And that still indicated to people that they were still mourning for somebody that they lost, especially if it was their husband. And you think about that because of the way the majority of Victorian women, especially the upper
Hmm.
and middle class women, did not have jobs. They weren't working outside the home, things like that. So it was their husband was not only their financial support, but they did everything else through their husband. So to lose your husband was a really big deal. So people understood that these women probably were mourning unless their husband really sucked. And there were those husbands that really
Oh,
sucked.
yeah.
These women probably didn't, they continued to mourn forever. And people knew that and they respected that. Then they didn't put a time limit on how long you could mourn.
Well, another thing too, women, once they lost their husbands, if they had an older son, the older son would take over, say the family had a business or whatever, the
Mm-hmm.
estate, the older son would take over the estate. So that also could be a way for her to protect herself from men, other men, single men who were looking for a wife, and
Right.
then of course then that money becomes his.
Yep.
So
So, or
yeah,
sometimes it was if they didn't have a son, but they had a son-in-law married to their, the
right.
son-in-law would take it over, whoever. But yeah, the Victorians were over the top. We've said it many times, but they did, at least in some ways, they knew how to mourn and they knew how to respect death and mourning in a
Yeah.
way that we're coming back to in our modern age now. We've moved beyond it's not nearly as sterile as it was for a while, but I think we're learning again how
Yeah.
to help people mourn and to move and to remember that there is no time limit when somebody dies, especially if you really loved them, that you're always going to mourn them. And so, as macabre and as creepy as some of the Victorian era moments were, like the photography, like some of the jewelry, it really did have a significant meaning to those people. And I think we're coming back to that in a lot of
Yeah.
ways.
I agree. I mean, it's no different, I think, than wearing cremains in a necklace.
True. Or a ring or anything else. And there's plenty of those.
Exactly.
So that is it for today's episode.
Yes.
Next week, coming up, the episode will be our annual Beyond the Grave episode. So it will
Oh, and this
be,
one's going to be so good.
yes,
We have received so many good comments about people who attended the event that you guys are really going to enjoy it.
yes. So it will be the audio version of our event. So you'll get to hear the full story as our actors did it for the event. And because we now put this on YouTube, there will be some photos and stuff. So if you want to watch it on YouTube, you can follow along with the photos while you're listening to the actors do it. And like I did last year, and I think maybe I did it the year before, we had them record them separately. So the first time we did this, we actually just took the audio from when we did it in the cemetery. It's
Oh,
not the
yeah, yeah.
greatest audio out there. I've gotten smarter. So we we had recording sessions. So the audio will be very good, and we'll include a lot of the pictures. So it'll be like a slideshow that you can watch as we go along, and you can see the whole thing and hear the whole thing. And then, of course, on Halloween itself, which is the following Thursday, you can go live with us. And we are so looking forward to meeting a lot of you online. And
Yeah.
there is a little notification about it on our social medias. The link is not quite ready yet. There's like a 24-hour waiting period, blah, 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 that I have to do with YouTube before I can give you guys the link. But once it's ready, I will be putting that out there. So you will have it and we'll remind you of it for the next couple of weeks here.
And it's just going to be fun to hang out. So hopefully many of you will be able to join us and just come hang out with us for a while.
Yeah, we look forward
God
to
knows what's going to happen.
it. Remember, Diane's going to have her Rocky Mountain High that night. So
You make it sound
join
like
us
I'm
for it.
smoking pot, but I won't be smoking pot. I'll just be on.
I say anytime you're on something in Colorado, it's a Rocky Mountain High.
Okay, fine. We thank you for taking time to join us today for this ordinary, extraordinary chat. To learn more about today's discussion, please visit our website, theordinaryextraordinarycemetery.com, where you will find additional links in our show notes. And if you're watching us on YouTube, be sure to give us a like and subscribe to our channel, The Ordinary Extraordinary Cemetery Podcast. This really helps makes us more visible to others on YouTube who may also enjoy our podcast.
And please don't forget to visit us on social media, where we share all kinds of cemetery photos, quotes, tidbits, and more. We are on Facebook and Instagram at Ordinary Extraordinary Cemetery, and on X at Ord Extra Sim. So ORDEXTRACEM. If you enjoyed this or any of our episodes, please consider leaving a 5-star review and a comment on Apple's podcast, Spotify, or directly on our website. You can also leave those same comments on YouTube. Your positive reviews and enthusiasm for our show help others who love cemeteries and history to discover us and all of our ordinary, extraordinary stories. And if you're feeling extra generous and want to help support the podcast in a financial way, you can now buy Dianne and I a cup of coffee, either through YouTube or on our website. Simply click on the coffee cup icon and it will allow you to make a donation.
Until we meet again.